I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Overview for June the 26th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, let's expect your mind alone, and when making decisions on how to any tropical cyclones, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we've got three systems that we're going to try talking about today, the same three ones that we were talking about yesterday. And we're going to start off in the Atlantic again with the remnants of Cindy. You can see the naked circulation there moving throughout the tropical Atlantic, or really more subtropical Atlantic now. And this system is generally north of the Virgin Islands. For reference, this is a big picture view of the water vapor loop. The low-level center is about here, so north of the Virgin Islands, generally south of Bermuda. And this system is forecast to track generally towards the north, towards Bermuda, and we could see some redevelopment here as the system gets further north. Now, right now, the system is obviously a remnant low. As it's fighting some southwesterly shear, you can see all the thunderstorm activity being sheared off. You can also see some of these upper-level cloud features moving quickly towards the northeast. That indicates the shear, and you can also see that very clearly in the water vapor loop. Again, the low centers here, and you've got all this southwesterly flow impacting the system, and also a lot of dry air. Look at all that dry air towards the northwest of the system, and this is getting entrained to that center, holding back any convective activity from firing on the center. Now, this system, as I mentioned, can have a possibility of redeveloping perhaps near Bermuda as it moves north. Now, this is a GFS 850 millibar flow here. Now, this is the actual, from what I can tell, this is the actual remnant low that we're seeing right now depicted on the GFS. It has moved more northwest on the model, and this is a new area of vorticity that actually forms southeast of it, and this goes on east of Bermuda to become a weak tropical cyclone, it looks like on the model. Now, this stuff does have some impacts to who gets what in Bermuda. If you get this system tracking perhaps west, if this system becomes the more dominant system as it starts to turn north, you could see some more significant impacts here as the system is more likely to move over the island. But if you get a system like the GFS is depicting forming here, and then this moves north, you would have the system moving east of Bermuda, and with that you could perhaps avoid some of the worst weather associated with the system, and you could actually get out fairly unscathed. So there is a bit of uncertainty there. But in general, the environment that's going into is a little bit more favorable than its current environment is. Here's a 200 millibar flow from the GFS. You can see where the system is that's trying to develop into a tropical cyclone is here in this lower pocket of shear. And alongside that, with that lower shear, it's on the southeastern side of this negative tilt trough in the upper levels. Now, these troughs, when they're negative tilt on the southeastern side, you can get some baryclinic supporting here. So you can start to get a sense that if the system goes into this area, it could have tropical characteristics playing into helping it redevelop. The oceanic conditions are very warm. There'll be a low shear. But alongside that, with the baryclinic supporting, you could have some atmospherics playing into perhaps some redevelopment or development of a new system on the eastern side of Bermuda. So there's some semblance of possibility that we could see this redevelop. Here's a sounding off the GFS at 3 days out. You can see the general light to moderate shear, about 17 knots there from the diverging flow from southeasterly to northwesterly aloft. In general, this is a lighter shear than it is in now. We could see the system fight off some of this shear and redevelop, especially with some of the atmospherics playing in. And as for track, the net flow of this flow would generally be northerly on this model. So we would be looking at the system again tracking north. And you can see that very clearly here in the National Hurricane Center graphic. You can see their area of interest. They're giving this about a 30% chance of redeveloping. This is the remnants of Cindy, but if something like the GFS plays out, that could be development of a separate system. I'm not exactly sure how the National Hurricane Center would treat that, but in general, the general picture, regardless of actual Cindy redeveloping or a new system developing, we could see some adverse impacts here in Bermuda this week as the system tracks this way. And in Atlantic Canada, we could see some impacts. Now, the GFS is on the side of taking this system north and then recurving it northeast, keeping it away from Atlantic Canada. But we have seen some modeling have this system track towards the north, towards Atlantic Canada. And that could also be an impact of the GFS going a bit strong on the system. You saw that southwesterly flow on the sounding. If the system gets stronger, it's more likely to track that way. And the GFS does seem to get it pretty strong at some point, which is a bias that this model does have. So we'll have to see exactly how that plays out. But again, 30% chance from the National Hurricane Center, regardless of development in Bermuda. You could see some adverse impacts. Stay tuned to the Bermuda Weather Service for the latest information on that. Now we're going to move away from the Atlantic and we're going to go to the East Pacific. Here is Invest 91E, which was designated today. And in general, this system does look disorganized as you'd expect for a tropical disturbance, but we're seeing some signs that the system may be trying to start getting its act together. Now, if we look at the low-level flow, we can see some light shear or light, let's see, that would be east-southeasterly flow on the northern side. We've got lots of westerly flow on the back side of this, and it looks like we might be getting, this may be some more mid-level elements, but we might be getting some wrapping around from northeast to south, or sorry, southeast to northeast flow there on the northern side around all this disorganized thunderstorm activity. And we also have some pretty light flow here east of the convection, indicating perhaps a broad circulation here in general. And this is sort of confirmed by a high pass that we got earlier today. We can see at least the western end of this, and it gives the general idea that we're seeing there with a broad circulation in general for the system. Now, alongside that, something I can pick out is we're also seeing the system get a little bit sheared. You can see a lot of this convection is getting a little bit sheared towards the southwest, and that is a factor of some shear from a ridge over Mexico and into portions of the US. And I can show you that here on the 200 millibar flow from the GFS. Let's go to hour 6. This would be about now, and you can see this ridge here. We're getting some of that flow coming from that ridge, and that is shearing the system a little bit. And this shear from this ridge is really going to be a story really all this system's life. Though the GFS and even the European, they've come into more better agreement in the possibility of the system, or sorry, I should say likelihood of the system developing now. Here's a GFS 10-meter wind speed, and I'm showing this mainly to show you how it developed the system. You can see by day 3 into day 4, we get the system developed off the coastline of Mexico. And the good news is, again, the system is going to stay offshore thanks to that ridge up north. Now, the GFS does intensify this quite a bit, and this system does certainly have the possibility to become a hurricane, though it will have some limitations. The limitations that it has, at least from what I can tell, is some shear from ridging. You can see this general ridging aloft. This is going to provide some shear. Alongside that, the GFS depicts the system behind 91E getting fairly strong, and that outflow into that system itself could shear 91E as well. But we'll, of course, have to see exactly how this system develops entirely. There's questions on how this system develops too. That could impact 91E. Now, the GFS does go fairly strong with this. It intensifies it into a fairly strong hurricane below 980 millibars before sea surface temperatures get too cool for intensification. And you can see that here. The 26-degree isotherm fairly far south due to the lower temperature anomalies here off the coast of Baja California. Now, the European has also changed a little bit. You can see the European is now developing the first system into a tropical cyclone. Now, the European might be a bit too weak on this, and this may be a factor of the GFS and the European biases playing roles. The GFS perhaps being a bit too strong with that bias, the European perhaps being a bit too weak. These systems, or these models, both have those kinds of biases. I'd say somewhere in the middle ground is a fair estimate right now for what 91E could do. I'd say for this system, it is likely to develop either way. We're likely to get our first system out of this. In terms of intensity as it comes out to sea, I'd say at least a tropical storm, perhaps getting towards a strong one, and it could perhaps approach hurricane status before the sea temperature temperatures run out. Now, this system is going to be a bit larger. You can see that on the modeling here compared to the second system, especially. That's a good reference point. You can see how the system is larger on the JFS. It's more broad. That could limit its overall peak intensity here because it's a larger wind field. But alongside that, it can also make it more resilient to some of the shear that it's going to be facing. So in that sense, we could see some intensification possibly to hurricane status. But again, this system is going to remain out to sea. And really for land impacts, we're going to be watching the second system east of 91E. Now, as this system develops, the GFS is very bullish on this. And this may be another case, yet another one, where the GFS is going to be a bit more biased towards a strong storm here. Now, there is certainly reason to believe that the system could get to possibly a hurricane as well as it tracks off the coast of Mexico. It will have a generally favorable environment. There will be some shear it may have to contend with, again, from that ridge that is also going to shear 91E. But it also depends on where the system develops. We're seeing solutions like, here's a European, showing the system being a little bit further north. If we get a system developing further north, that could lead it right into Mexico fairly soon. If we get a system developing on the southern side, we could see this system remain offshore and perhaps become a stronger system off the coastline. Now, this is also a case where I feel the Europeans' biases are coming in. If having a weaker storm, you can see it barely develops into a tropical cyclone, if at all. And the GFS, I feel, is too strong with this. I feel a good middle ground is the ICON model, and this, I feel, has a good idea on perhaps what the system could do. You can see it gets it to a tropical storm and intensifies it a little bit, perhaps to a mid-grade tropical storm, to perhaps a stronger tropical storm as it comes off the coastline, maybe getting towards hurricane intensity off the coastline. I feel this is a good middle ground for the system, considering the environmental conditions here. Now, we aren't expecting a big hurricane, of course, to come into Mexico. We're not to that time of year yet. But as this system still remains offshore, you could still see some significant impacts here. As you all know, in Mexico, this is a very mountainous part of the region. And if you get onshore flow into that, you can get a lot of heavy rainfall and a lot of rainfall falling in a very short amount of time. That could lead to localized flash flooding and possibly some mudslides. So even as the system remains offshore, we could still see some significant impacts here. We could also see from both of these systems rip current risks and higher surf as these systems push through. So just letting you all know of that. Now again, we're still a bit unsure on how the system will consolidate. Again, if it forms on the northern side, we could absolutely see the system get very close to Mexico, such as the European showed, but also we could see the system just come ashore in Mexico much earlier. Now, on the southern side of things, we could see the system hanging offshore, maybe just scrape the coastline, and there's the icon there. You can see again, tropical storm, and the GFS is again pretty strong with it. It is, I feel, again a bit bullish. I mean, that puts it into a strong hurricane offshore. I'd say that may be a worst case scenario for the system, but in general, I'd say both are likely to form, and we could certainly see some impacts along the Mexican coastline from both of them. Now, here's the National Hurricane Center graphic on these two systems. You can see the first one here. They've ramped up odds once again to 90%, and we are likely to see this system develop. We are already seeing some signs that the system is organizing, and it looks pretty likely that this system is going to be the first system. No more holding back on a delayed start here for the Pacific. This will be its start. Likely, I believe it's now the latest start on record. I might be wrong on that, but it's certainly one of the latest starts on record. But again, this system is going to generally track westwards away from Mexico. This second system, they're now giving this a 70% chance of developing as it generally moves northwestwards, and this could bring some impacts to Mexico. But that's all that I've got today. Again, as a recap for the Atlantic system, the remnants of Cindy are continuing to push through the Atlantic. The low-level circulation is here on the water vapor, and you can see it's being sheared right now quite significantly, but as it comes further north, we could see some redevelopment of the system as it comes towards Bermuda, as it enters a lower shear environment. Though, regardless of development, we could still see some adverse impacts in Bermuda, and stay tuned to your local weather office for the latest information there. And for those in Mexico, for local information ahead of both of these systems, primarily the second system, look towards your local weather office and the National Hurricane Center. They're going to have the best information ahead of both of these systems. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.